Good day, this is Tim Gillio. It's Wednesday, the 16th of October, 2019, 5 days for the federal election. This is the rest of the story. For those paying attention, yesterday was the 15th, which was the settlement conference for the lawsuit against the Prime Minister of Canada and Big T's Holdings, Inc., which I represent. The Big T's Holdings, Inc. Went into it, had asked, back when we went to file a default judgment against them because the government hadn't responded to any of the claims or any of the actions taken through the small claims court. Now, small claims court, you might ask, it's kind of a waste of time, but we're trying to find an economical way of depositing information or the information pertaining to the criminal activities surrounding the industry and the government's cooperation or collusion and corruption into an official court file. So we wrote up the 16 pages of the original claim, filed it. Of course, the government didn't respond. We gave them an extra almost 3 months with it to try to respond. They didn't. So then we finally said, okay, we'll file a default against them. We'll file a default judgment against them, which means they would have lost. Through the goofing around, it kind of put the clerks and the Crown into hyper mode. They got a little bit concerned there. Next thing you know, mysteriously, along comes a fax. Oh, look, they responded 2 days ago. Hey, cool. So that's how things work in this world, right? They're generally not on the up and up, but that's okay. We seem to get used to it. So we ended up, they wanted to say, okay, that's it. They were arguing they had a jurisdictional argument. I said, I don't care. I said, I paid for the damn thing. I want my day in court. So I want a judge to make the ruling on this. So the next thing that happened, of course, was we went for a run around. We discussed this in several videos. So then we ended up asking for an informational so we could lay charges of the criminal nature that had already been written up into this small claims court action. So an informational, of course, they didn't know where one was, and we ended up running around in circles there for quite a while. So that circle jerk ended up going up and down from the Crown, from the Crown office back down to the clerk desk, from the clerk desk over to the RCMP, to the RCMP having opened the file. The RCMP didn't know what to put in the file. I said, but you don't know. So the name of that file is we don't know. Then we come back to, we dropped the informational stuff. They agreed to give us a settlement hearing. So yesterday was a settlement hearing. We come into the settlement hearing. We didn't pick up the submission from the Attorney General. It's sitting there. The reasoning for their decision or their defense. The reason we didn't pick it up is because, as you guys have heard before, I don't pick up my mail. I have a service that picks up the mail. The service also does my bookkeeping and looks after the accounting for me. Therefore, they are also the first ones that deal with the CRA for you Americans. That's our IRS up here in Canada. They work closely together, by the way. They're both corrupt organizations, full of people that have a hell of a time speaking English. But that's here nor there. So while we sat down in the middle of this thing, I mean, the judge had, of course, was going to side with the Attorney General. I mean, don't blame him. That's the biggest boss they have. That dictates, helps dictate their forward career movement. That's unfortunately the way the system's set up. So that's what you got to deal with. So we sat down, and I started to explain a little bit about it. Like I asked Mr. Paletti, the Attorney General, why he hadn't gotten back to me after I had phoned him and left a message on the Sunday, September 8th, regarding why he never referenced the amendments to his decision, or his defense, which came out 7 years after the article of law that he was using, which seemed to be the same article of law that the judge was using to make his summation. So I brought that summation out, and I said, here's a write-up on the whole amendment. Of course, I didn't have time to submit it. He didn't really have time during the time allowed to sit there and make a judgment on that, which was fine. That didn't really bother me that much. When we brought that out, and I started to explain some of the people that were involved with it, that of course being the 637 officers and directors of the oil and gas industry, which are also responsible for most of our banking in Canada. How these people, that they're involved in the 64 top oil companies, Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers, all the way up through the premierships and the Prime Minister's office, all the way up through Canada, all the way into the United States, and geopolitically, the Chinese investment community, And, even George Soros, Open Society. When I started showing him all these different letters going back and forth to people, I had a pile of stuff on my desk, so you can guarantee he didn't really want to have time for it. It would take a week of Sundays to get through it. He decided that that it was time that even though it was a small claims proceedings, that he asked the clerk if the recording was recording it, which clerk responded, yes, it was. Therefore, he told the clerk to make sure it was recorded because he wanted it transcribed. So they wanted his decision transcribed, the whole case transcribed. As soon as I heard that, I said, okay, great. Then I asked the Attorney General if he was willing that I would agree to the judge's ruling, right, without further impeding it, right, or further action, because there are actions I can take. If he would be willing to take a look at the criminal matters, which involved everything up to capital murder. Because when 217.1 is the Criminal Liability of Organizations Act, when you ask people to do things and it results in the death of people, if you ask something to do it, you should have known, or knowingly should have known that it could result in death. You are therefore liable for the murder of that person, for the injuries of the people, for the destruction of the environment, the destruction, blah 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 blah. And you can read the act yourself. So again, it's the Criminal Liability of Organizations Act. We go over it many times in these videos. So that's kind of where we're at. That's how it worked. When we're all done and said, we have a court file in the Dawson Creek Registry, file number 22760, which will stay there in perpetuity, which has the criminal, which lists 16 pages of the criminal activity around 217.1, the extortion of the industry, the use of the CRA, which is my contention. It doesn't matter. None of the contention was argued. This was a technicality which they overthrew it on a technicality called jurisdictional privilege, which I don't entirely disagree with them. There are some good articles or good aspects of the case study from the exemption or the amendments from 7 years later in '92. To that end, I asked the judge if he wanted it. He said yes, which tells me that he didn't really have a whole lot of idea of the amendments that have been done, which would be normal because when you're dealing with anything, when you come out of school, depending on when you came out of school, you would have studied this or that, and it's up to you're looking on. I happened to get lucky. I had somebody steer me to it. So unless you're doing, I was looking through the law libraries and I was looking for my defense, and the same thing. Somebody just happened to steer me to it. That's how I found it. So now he's been steered to it. I asked him to share it with the Attorney General so that they take it into consideration when they make a submission. Because now, even though I asked them to look at the criminal aspects, they declined, saying this is a civil matter. It doesn't matter. The fact that we've gone to this extent to expose the criminality, it exists. We have Bob Zimmer, who is my MP, who's been provided this information now for over a year. We have my MLA, Mike Bernier, again, has been provided this information for a year and a half. As these people assume power or assume governance, it's not like Trudeau. To his defense, he wouldn't have had a clue. Nobody in that environment would have had a clue. We're talking about stuff that started 17 years ago, really about 12 years ago or so, 10 for sure. The industry and the government, they colluded to the point where they just did what they want. The intellectual property, trying to develop or maintain your intellectual property is just impossible in Canada. Believe it or not, that was the interesting thing that was also brought up in this settlement hearing. We did it on purpose. Now, the government is responsible since the '92 amendments of jurisdiction. One of the things that they are explicitly responsible for is intellectual property. So that's kind of an interesting thing, because now we have, hopefully that transpires with our assistance with Mr. Bob Zimmer and making sure that we make sure everybody has the same information. We give it to the Liberals as much as we give it to everybody else. Oh, disappeared.